Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament. We are doing a chronological study through the four Gospels right now: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we've been on the Sermon on the Mount, and this is going to be the last lesson that we have. If you're curious, the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 5 through 7, and so we've been looking at that. And today's going to be a little bit longer. It's going to go into a little bit a harder of a subject, kind of like yesterday's was. We're talking about the narrow way into heaven, but this one's going to look at kind of the false prophets and people who follow the false prophets, kind of in the church. I mean, I'll say more. The New Living Translation says, "Beware false prophets." I think a lot of this is false teachers, false leaders in the church, and stuff like that. And unfortunately, we are seeing a rise in that in the church, and it's something that's not been good for us. I mean, and if you've watched the news lately, you've seen a lot of it where you just had a lot of these, a lot of issues, a lot of moral failures in the church, and this is part of it. And this is something, they had this problem in the early church. They had this problem with the Pharisees. They were very, hypocritical, very much false prophets. And so we're going to see that same thing. So he starts out here with, in Matthew 7, verse 15, he says, "Beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. You can detect them by their fruit." And this is the whole meaning of this lesson is Jesus is telling us, you're going to know people. You'll know people by your fruits. And so, and then basically it is that's the way they act. And he says, "Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles?" He says, "A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce," and I like this, "a good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown in the fire." And he says, yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, you can identify people by their actions. And so we've got to look at this, and we've got to learn to start paying attention to people's actions, right? There's so many times where I've seen in the church where someone will do something, and and they'll say a lot of nice words, and we completely ignore their actions over and over again. It's like, or they'll apologize, and it's like, and it'll be this idea of, like, oh, well, they apologize, and so we just have to move on. It's like, no, we really need to watch their actions. Yeah, well, yes, accept their apology, look at it, but it's just, I don't know, I don't understand it. And so false prophets were common in the Old Testament. We saw that, right? They prophesied only what the king and the people wanted to hear. And we see a lot of that in the church, and we see it on both sides. We see a lot of people who they'll teach only what the world wants to hear. So like people will come to their church. But then again, you get into churches and denominations where they'll only preach certain things that they're allowed to preach, or that you're not allowed to look, you're not allowed to search, you're not allowed to dive deeper into scriptures, because, well, something might go against what they teach. And so you have these people who are false teachers, in the sense that they only will teach certain things. They won't go deeper into the word, and they won't actually look and dive into it, and they only stay and teach what they're allowed to teach by their leadership. And so, you know, Jesus was indicating here that false prophets were just as relevant in his time too, right? They had them in the Old Testament when we have them today. And so, they are common today. And I'm not, and see, a lot of times we think, oh, well, a false teacher is someone who's just out there completely teaching something against the Bible. And actually, a lot of times I will call false teachers who teach things, who teach just enough to play it safe in the church, right? Not to ruffle any feathers, or not to, it's like they tickle ears. And it's like, it's not tickling ears with just things they want to hear, but it's tickling ears with, well, this has always been tradition, so we can't talk about it, or go against it, because it's always been tradition. And it's like, no, we've got to look at what the Bible says. And while traditions can be nice, sometimes we've got to go deeper into that. And so, you know Jesus said to be aware of those whose words sound religious, and there's a lot of people out there who sound very religious, right? But who are motivated by money, fame, or power. And I'm telling you, man, those three things right there, I have seen people do stuff and stab people in the back, and go around and talk about people, and do whatever they can to get into one of those three, or all three, right? To have some sort of power or authority, to for some sort of fame, right? To be recognized as someone, and then money. And why we've talked about that with the churches. I mean, there's churches there are, and it's becoming a problem in our churches where we are overlooking things because of money, right? We allow people to do things because of money, or we don't want to upset these people because they give a lot of money, and we cannot be doing that. That's just, you know, that's going 100% against what God teaches. And if you have to keep if you have to allow a sinful behavior just to keep money coming into your church, then you've got it all set up wrong. And that's one of the things we talked about with us. Is one of the reasons we have tried to set up to where we have very little overhead expenses is because I don't want someone, or we don't want someone coming into the church and giving a lot of money and then thinking that they can just do whatever they want. Because if someone were to come in and behave a certain way, especially a very ungodly way and hateful toward people, then we will ask them to go down the road, right? Because we don't want that kind of behavior, and we're free to do that because we're not dependent on them for their money. But unfortunately, a lot of churches can't do that. They get stuck in that situation because they've built new buildings, or they've got certain programs or things like that that they're doing. It's like, well, we're dependent on this person, even though they're doing these things, or some of the doing immoral stuff. We have to overlook it because we need the money to continue to come in. And so you've got to be very, very careful with what you do in this stuff. And so looking at these false prophets and these false teachers, you're going to know them by their fruits, right? And so verse 20 hits that and it says, we should evaluate our teachers' words by examining their lives, right? A lot of people can stand in front of us and say a lot of things, right? A lot of people can stand in front of us and put on a really good show of the type of person that they are. But start examining the way they live their lives. Start talking, or and I'm not doing this as a oh well, we got to try to catch them or get them. It's like, but examine the people in their lives. What do the people in their lives say about them, right? What does one of the things that the Bible talks about is, we as leaders in the church especially, they need to be well known or well liked by the outside. Well, if no one outside the church likes them, then maybe there's something we need to look at, right? Or if there's a lot of people outside the church. And so there's a reason for these type of things that we look at in qualifications for leadership is if they have a lot of problems with people outside the church, and a lot of say maybe even problems with people inside the church, we need to start looking at their actions, their lives, digging a little deeper, what's going on. Because in the end, if we do that, then that truly safeguards the church. And honestly, we haven't been doing that. I will be honest. In a lot of cases, we haven't been doing that, and that's why you're seeing a lot of these failures, a lot of these high-profile things that are happening, is because either, things that they'll set up and they'll get into a leadership and they'll have a group of people around them that's protecting them, allowing, and those group of people are acting a certain way and allowing themselves to do that. And so I'm kind of going deep into this one, but because this is a big problem. Like, this is a big problem in the church. One of the main reasons that people are leaving the church in droves is because of immoral actions in leadership. And I'm not talking about, oh well, someone messed up, right? He or she messed up, right? I'm talking about someone continuously messing up really, really bad, and then the church and the people around them covering up for it, and then eventually it gets out, and then it becomes a horrible thing. And we've seen this pattern repeat itself over and over, and a lot of people in the church see this happening. Some of them have even come forward about it, and it's like nothing's done. And so they end up leaving. And a lot of them leave and don't come back to church, whatever. It's like, if this is what Christianity is, I don't have anything to do with it. And so again, like I said, we're not talking about witch hunts here. We're not talking about, going around like, you know, just private eyes and that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about if you watch someone long enough, they're going to show you their true character, right? And if you watch someone and they're always kind, but if you watch someone and then you start seeing these red flags pop up, you see them treat people bad, right? Then maybe you need to start paying attention a little bit closer. Or if people, around them say, hey, you need to watch, maybe you need to pay attention to that, because there's good reason a lot of times when people do it. Now, there's always false accusations. And that's why you got to use discernment. But we've just got to do a better job of keeping an eye on the people in our church, especially the leadership in our church, and the things that they're doing in the lives that they're living. You know them by their fruits, right? And we need to pay attention to that, right? And like I said, we're not talking about witch hunts. We're not talking about just trying to send private eyes in everyone's in the church's lives, but just using common sense approach to watching people in the way they behave, right? And so we gotta watch people's motives. Like, what are the motives behind people? Are they doing things just to stay in power, or just so that they can keep some sort of control, or they or what they doing is it a push to actually grow the church and actually and see the church go and see God's will done, or is it more about them and what they're doing and stuff like that? And so we've got to be careful with that, and because too often we see in churches it become more about the fame of the preacher, right? Or the look at what we did, what we do, what we've done, right? And it becomes less and less about God, and it's more and more about us, and look at who we are, and look how awesome we are. And so we've got to be careful with those types of teachings, right? And is your teaching about moving yourself forward, or moving the church forward, or moving the work of the church forward, or as I've seen in a lot of cases as well, is your foundation about going out and attacking others? And if you're one of your main messages or communications is going out and how you're right and everyone else is wrong, and we see that a lot in the churches, and we've got to start to humble ourselves a little bit and understand, say, hey, we really don't know it all, right? We don't have it. A lot of this is very uncertain, right? A lot of it's best guess in some things, and so we've got to, there's a lot that we're 100% sure on. I mean, most people agree. There's a lot of that's pretty solid, but there's a lot out there that is just, there's it's a gap. We're trying to fill it in, and then we've got to do the best. And so we need to make sure that we are focusing on doing what's best for the church, doing what's best for growing God's kingdom, and not trying to do what's best for trying to make us look good. And what I mean by that is not trying to make us famous, or ourselves famous, right? Like, or a pastor famous, or a particular church famous, but it is making God famous, and us being a representative of the church as Christ, and representing that in a very loving and humble fashion. And so, again, I know I went a little bit deep on that one, but this is a very, I don't know, maybe this is why he saves us for the end of this, because this is a very serious issue that we're seeing in the church today, and people are leaving, and they're leaving really quickly because of issues like that. All right, then he gets into verse 21 talking about true disciples, and he says, not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will actually enter the kingdom of the heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven and in earth. And so, um, we've got to make sure we do. There's a lot of, what I would call easy Christianity out there. It's like, well, all you've got to do is say this little prayer, and as long as you've said this prayer once, that you believe in God, then you're good for the rest of your life. And you're not going to find that anywhere in the Bible, right? Christianity is we start with, you know obeying the commands of Christ, and doing things, and confessing that Christ is Lord. That's part of the start. But Christianity, the Christian walk, is the Christianity, and the Christian life is an entire life of walking, right? It's walking that life for an entire lifetime. And it's not just some simple stuff. And so we've got this a lot of false teachings out there of, well, you don't, as long as you're a good person, as long as you do these things, and you've said that, you've asked Jesus into your heart, or you've done something like that, then you're good to go and you're saved. And that's nowhere in the Bible, right? And so we need to make sure that we're not teaching, or giving people false hope like that, because if you watch Jesus and listen to Jesus' message, and we're going to continue to do that, it is a walk, right? It is a continuous walk, and it's not just, oh, I did a couple of nice things, I did a couple of good things, and I'm good now. It's a lifestyle, and you have to live that lifestyle, because he says in the end, people are going to say, I prophesy your name, I cast out demons, and he's going to say, I never knew you, get away from me. And so we, that would be that's a very sad day for a lot of people. And so Jesus here is exposing those people who sound religious but have no personal relationship with him. And that's the key, right? There's Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who, they can sound very religious, and they can say a lot of the right things, and they can say, they know a lot of the Bible, but they have no personal relationship with Christ. And you can see it. You can see it by the fruits. And that's hard, right? And so Judgment Day is going to be scary for some of those people, and I hate that. And like I said, many people think, well, as long as I'm good, right? And I'm good enough, and I don't murder, and I don't do those sort of things, then I'm good. But that's not what Jesus is calling us to. That's not what Jesus is calling to the life that we're here. And so it's about a personal relationship and a personal walk with Jesus. And I'm afraid in a lot of churches and in a lot of faiths, right, where we are teaching people, hey, and we're because our focus a lot of times is, hey, as long as you show up to the building and you give and you take communion and you do these things, right, then you're good. And a lot of times we'll say that. We'll say you'll hear at funerals and things like that. Well, sister so and so or brother so and so, he or she was here every time the door was open and all that kind of stuff. And that's good, right? That's good to be part of the church. But it's like we make that the criteria for being a good person, right? Some of them people may have been there every time the church door is open, but they also may have been the biggest jerk in the world too, right? And so it's not just about those things. Now, those things are assembling with the saints, assembling with other Christians. That's important, right? Giving back to God is important. Those things are important, but we've got to make sure that it goes deeper than that, and it goes deep into a relationship with Christ, and not just a surface level. Well, I did all these things, I checked all these boxes, and so now I'm good to go. And then I want to make sure that we don't get into that type of Christianity, because I think if you are just a check boxer, right? You just check the boxes. I'm afraid that this you could be, or someone who does that could end up being the one that Jesus said, "Look, I never knew you. You showed up at my at the buildings and the services, but you never had a relationship with me." And so you need to make sure that you have a deeper relationship than just showing up to church on Sundays listening to a message. You need to make sure you have a much deeper relationship with him than that, and definitely look into that if you feel like you're on that. All right, and then finally he gets into building on a solid foundation, and where he says, anyone who listens to my teachings and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on a rock. Right? Though he says, though the rains and comes and torrents and floodwaters rise and stuff like that, it's not going to collapse. Right? But he says, and this is, we've sang this song. If you've been part of VBSs, you've been part of Sunday school, right? We talk about the wise man built his house upon the rock, and the foolish man built his house upon the sand. And that's what this whole thing is those who build their foundation on Christ and have a solid foundation built on Christ, when the troubles of life come, it's not going to wash you away. But if you build it on something that's soft and not true, right, and that like the foolish man did, then that's going to be washed away by the troubles of life. And we need to make sure that what our foundation is built on is a solid foundation, not something that's just soft, right, and is going to collapse on us the first time we hit struggles, right? And so it says here, like a house of cards, the fool's life crumbles. Most people do not deliberately seek to build on a false or inferior foundation, but instead they just don't think about life's purpose. And we have like a lot of times you're going through life, right? Just going through, you don't sit down and really think about it. And this is where we need a part of our responsibility is to help others and to stop and think where their lives are headed, right? And to point at the consequences of ignoring Christ's message through this. And to sum all this up, right? To sum all of Matthew 5 through Matthew 7 up, if you look at everything, it goes back to a matter of the heart, right? It doesn't matter what you do. It's not about, how good you are at it, right? You look at prayer, right? Well, actually, let's start with if you sum all this up, you look at lust and you look at adultery and you look at murder. And he says, all that stuff starts in the heart. All those sins that he talks about, all of it starts in the heart. And then he starts talking about the good thing, like our prayer, right? And talking to God and our giving and those type of things and helping people. And again, where does that all go back to? Goes back to it being a matter of the heart. It's all about a matter of the heart and the condition of the heart. And so that's what you need to look at. And that's why I think he finishes this with talking about judging people by the fruits, because what's in the heart is going to come out eventually. Right? And if someone's coming after power or authority or money or those type of things, that's going to show eventually. It's going to come out. right? But if someone is truly about helping people, loving people, caring for people, and being like Jesus, then that's going to show. That's truly going to come out, and that's truly going to show. And he's showing us that this at the end of this, what that's going to look like. And he's warning us what kind of foundation to build on, right? The foolish foundation is someone who's trying to build something, their life on Christ about power and money and those type of things. That's foolish. All that stuff's going to be burned up, right? But if you build your foundation on Christ and focused on love and mercy and faith and those type of things, then that's going to be a strong foundation. Because when that power and that money and those type of things and all the fame and the praise goes away, you're not left with much, right? But you love and you show kindness and mercy and grace to people. It doesn't matter what comes along. That's going to be a strong foundation, and that's going to be a foundation that lasts. And so I want you to think about that, and I want you to think back and maybe go back through and read 5 through 7 again and look at all these things that Jesus talked about, and then look at your heart, right? What's the condition of your heart? Is it truly going after Jesus? Right? Is it truly about Jesus, or is it about other things, right? Or have you fooled yourself and you think you are, but you're like, you know what? My focus hasn't been on the right stuff. My focus has been on things that, are worldly or are things I shouldn't be focused on. But I want to shift this to what Christ. I want to change the condition of my heart and show it to what Christ wants us to focus on. So that way, what is in the heart comes out, and it's a good fruit, and it's a good fruit that helps the church multiply. And then verse 28 and 29 says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. Jesus knew what he was talking about, right? He created this world. He created everything. He knew the hearts of all the people, and he could speak with real authority to what was happening and to what was going on here. And so it's just continued to prove who he was by the way he was able to just speak to things and talk to people and grab their hearts and show them who they were or who they weren't, and push them on. So again, I know this one's been a little bit longer. I appreciate you for sticking to the end, and I appreciate you for sticking through all the Beatitudes, or I'm sorry, through the Sermon on the Mount. This is a long series of lessons. This is one of the longest sections, that kind of covers a lot of Jesus's teachings that we have in the New Testament. But it's good, and I recommend going back and reviewing it and making sure this is Jesus is building here a foundation with all these things for a good life of following him, and we need to make sure we obey these teachings. Again, I appreciate you for watching to the end. As always, I hope if you think this will be helpful to someone, share it to them, send it to them. I would appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. We're going to continue to put stuff out like this, put content out. We're doing other studies and other Q&As and that kind of stuff. So again, thank you for watching.